because I don't want to go backwards. I want to keep going forward. Together, that's exactly where we're going to go. God bless.
I'm Steve Walters.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
This is Rewind, Wisconsin Eye's summary of this week in the Capitol. JR, they only took one vote this week in the Assembly, but it was a big deal. It passed the $500 million financing arena, put it on Governor Walker's desk. I think it's interesting, though. You and I want to break it down a little bit. I'll go first. 36 Republicans voted yes. 16 Democrats voted yes, including 7 Dems for Milwaukee. But you were telling me some Republicans had said no, but they ended up voting yes?
Well, what's interesting is a guy like Scott Allen, for example. He's from Waukesha County. He had really raised concerns about public financing for a sports arena, and then he voted yes. And his reasoning in his release this week was that, in the end, it was a good deal for taxpayers. Now, what's interesting, I don't know if a vote like that is enough to hurt somebody like a Scott Allen who's in a deep red seat, safe seat, but it would be interesting if you want to prod that a little bit, like, well, why? What's your basis for support? And the argument of it's a good deal for taxpayers is easy to make in a conversation with you and I, but in a 30-second TV ad, it's kind of tougher to get that across, and you can get hit pretty hard for it. A guy like Warren Petrick, for example, he's from the Eau Claire area. This is a guy, there were 11 Republicans who voted no on the budget, 10 voted no on the Bucks arena. He was the one who voted yes. Now his answer was the same. It's a good deal overall, and talk to his constituents, it makes sense. But he's in a swing district a little bit. I mean, you know, he's done a very good job of raising money, and he's not considered like endangered, if you will, but that's a vote. If they can hit you for $5 million for a scoreboard 5 years ago, think about $250 for a sports arena. I mean, that's a good TV ad, if you will. But again, his argument was it's a good deal for taxpayers. So that seemed to be the driving theme, if you will, for some of those folks who voted for it. Now, look at the Democrats. You didn't get much support outstate, you know, outside of leadership. Other like Steve Doyle, for example. Here's a guy who holds a Republican-leaning seat, like really slightly Republican at the top of the ticket. He voted no. That's smart politics.
I'm looking at the roll call. Go ahead.
Know? But the Milwaukee Dems, look at guys who voted no. The Milwaukee Dems, at Brostoff and Bowen. They voted no. They wanted a better deal, if you will. And now what's interesting is this deal brings jobs to that area. So can that be used against them, for example?
Scott Fitzgerald said 2,100 jobs, excuse me.
So can you use that against them in a primary? Again, most of these seats are not endangered, if you will, in a general election. It's a primary. Could you maybe beat up those guys who are like, look, they vote against jobs to the district. What's going on with that kind of thing? So I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. Maybe it was more of geography, if you will, that if you're in southeastern Wisconsin, you see the potential, you know, for growth versus, you know, outstate going, I want nothing to do with this thing.
Well, fellow junkie, the Democrats make up 37%. They hold 37% of the seats. The Bucks Arena package got a total of 73 votes, only 30% of which came from Milwaukee Dems. I just find that kind of interesting.
That's interesting. There are also a bunch of people missing, by the way, on Tuesday, which made it, you know, not as nearly as many to pass it. So, and what's interesting too was we kept thinking maybe it was going to be a close vote in both houses. Ended up not being in the end. They got momentum. Now there are a couple of reasons for that. Labor got behind this. Talking to Fred Kessler, for example, and Milwaukee Dems in general had said they want changes to this thing before they vote for it. But Kessler said, I got one, the Senate bill was different from the one we saw 3 weeks ago. Made me happier. And two, I've got assurances from my leadership that the Bucks will do things like minority hiring and guarantees on good wages. So that made me comfortable with the deal.
Well, it was interesting because the 7 Milwaukee Dems that voted for it, Barnes, Goyke, Johnson, Kessler, Sinicki, Young, and Zebnik. And then you had 2 that voted no, as you just said, and you had one that was gone. Representative
Reamer, who was in Turkey, I think, on his way to Turkey for a cultural exchange, but he expressed concerns about the bill before, so I don't know if he would have been a yes if he was there.
Okay, now let's talk about what happens next, because it goes to the Milwaukee Common Council, and Barrett said he's going to have a tough sell, and Council President Murphy says he's going to give it a full review.
We want to get the governor to use his partial veto authority, direct more money toward the center district, those kinds of things, so we'll see if that happens. A couple of interesting hiccups along the way, though. I mean, you have to have, for example, like the city council sign off on this parking garage in the TIF district. The county board was cut out of the development part of this with Park East. You know, $1 that Abley wants to sell it to the Bucks for. But Abley, remember the original bill called for having the county contract with the state to collect $4 million a year roughly in
for 20 years,
debts
80
for
million.
20 years.
Right.
Some concerns about that. Will it really materialize? Is that money there? By the way, you're taking money from people who can at least afford to pay it, that kind of thing. Well, Chris Larson, the state senator, got that pulled out of the bill, said, okay, if they want to do it on their own, that's fine, but we're not going to require them to do it. Abley late last week sent a MOU to John Barrett, Clerk of Circuit Courts, and David Cullen, the Treasurer, saying, hey, let's agree to do the debt collection. Here's an outline of how we want to do it. What do you guys think? They both raised concerns about what Barrett or Abley's proposing. Yesterday, the county board gave Barrett approval to negotiate with DOR.
Negotiate with DOR.
To try and find out what the deal
So
would be.
it's not a mandate to participate in that debt collection.
But that's a big question for Milwaukee County, because if you don't do something like this, it's a $4 million hit to your shared revenue and your bottom line. You've got to find a way to make that up. How do you make that up? Do you go property taxes? What do you do? Larson is saying, look, they struck a bad deal. You know, we saved Chris Abley from himself at this point.
That's what he said. That's what he said.
By doing this, we tried. He told me that in negotiations they asked for more of the ticket surcharge to go to the county to try and lower the county's contribution. That was shot down. They also tried to get some of the food and beverage tax diverted to help the county. That was shot down. No appetite for it, he said. Right. But again, the question is, well, okay, well, what's your alternative to do this? And that's
I find it most interesting that this Bucks financing package deliberately cut out the role of the county board in Milwaukee. That's because of this contentious back and forth?
You look at the budget in general, it sought to, like, originally the joint finance budget, the one that came out of that committee, sought to undercut all kinds of county board authority.
That's true.
You know, and what you're seeing is Abley has issues with local Democrats, especially progressives, that they don't like something that he's done. They feel like he is almost governing like a Scott Walker type, which they don't like. I mean, he is fiscally moderate and socially liberal, but they don't like the fiscally moderate thing being like, kind of that's what, well, hey, we got rid of this Walker guy, what's going on? Anyway, Abley is having these kind of conflicts with guys like Chris Larson, progressive wing. The county board is antagonistic toward Abley at times. They don't get along very well. And Republicans are going, like, we like this guy. We worked with him. He's very reasonable. We're going to kind of county board push you aside on some
If not the county board, is it purely Abley that has to sign off on this deal for the county? Just Abley?
I understand it. It's all about the Park East land. So that's the big thing. Now, again, getting the approval of collecting the debts, that will be some collaborative effort, if you will, because Barrett said, if I reach a deal, when I reach a deal with DOR, I'm taking it back to the county board for approval. There's some things there.
There we go.
But it's still, they're on the hook for that $4 million no matter what. So that's part's taken care of. The Park East thing, as I understand it, is basically all Abley's baby right now, and he's indicated he wants to do it.
Yeah. That state assembly vote, though, sent the ledge home for the summer.
Yes.
Let's talk about I'm going to put two items on their fall agenda, and you tell me if you agree. First, do you see them enacting new campaign finance laws in the fact that both the Doe and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals have erased many of our campaign finance laws? You know,
we're left with very little, if you will. I mean, there are lots of things on the books, but of the true, like, restrictions, there's little left.
There's few thou shalts that are still on the books, right?
There used to be a de facto limit on state parties, for example. So because it's $10,000 per year for a donor, you could only give, if you maxed out to the governor, that was it. You couldn't give to the party. Now you can give as much as you want to the party, and by the way, the party can then put that in the governor's campaign. Because committee to committee is now, that limit is gone for the total PAC contribution limit. So stuff like that is off the books. I get the impression that Robin Voss wants to do something. Now, I don't get the impression from Republicans they want to do more restrictions. They're going to go back to very low limits, those kinds of things. Voss has talked about raising contribution limits, strengthening parties. There's one argument to be made, if you will, that these shadowy interest groups and outside groups, that they've grown in power because the state parties have had these restrictions on money. So maybe that happens, but they're still working on that. But definitely this fall, I think they want to get something done.
But that 10,000 limit on what one person could give to a candidate for statewide office, that's still on the books, right? That hasn't been washed away.
To the governor, yes.
Yes.
But
to the governor, other statewide offices, yes.
But the cumulative, like $10,000 per year,
that's blown away.
Yes.
And that 10,000 limit hasn't been changed since the 1970s.
Eric O'Keefe, obviously, who was one of the targets of this John Doe investigation, he said, look, if you want to try and negate some of the influence we have, lift the limits. They haven't been changed in 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
It would dilute some of our influence. Oh, by the way, though, there's still certain people who want the anonymity, if you will, of a Club for Growth or all these other progressive groups that do stuff as well, because they like to give their money without anybody knowing what's going on.
Okay, so you have a question whether they're actually going to act on campaign finance limits this fall.
Well, where are they going to set them? I guess that's my question.
Okay.
How high will they go? Because it's, what, $250 for assembly candidate, right? Something like that, $500, somewhere in that neighborhood. So,
it's It's very small.
It's
that
changed
also
a great
has
deal.
well, but the number was fixed in the 1970s. But you and I can both agree that they're certainly going to do something on GAB.
Absolutely.
Okay.
They have them in their sights very much.
They do. In fact, this was a question I put to GAB Director Kevin Kennedy just this week. Would you resign to save your agency?
I don't think it's a question of my having to resign to save the agency. If the most important thing to the legislature is to get rid of me, they did that once before. I don't think I need to play a martyr by saying I'm going to go for the good of the agency. I think the agency has enough merit on itself. If there's a question about the leadership, and there have been proposals to have that person confirmed by either the Senate or the full legislature, let them put that into place.
Okay, JR, I put it straight up. Kevin, would you resign to preserve GAB? He didn't give us a definitive answer, which, do you think he would?
That's an excellent question. Now, here's an interesting tidbit to add to that. This week, the GAB released a bunch of emails between Kevin and Lois Lerner. Remember, there was this connection that was made that they have a long-standing personal friendship.
Now,
They're
Lois
exchanging
Lerner
emails.
was the Internal Revenue Service person who allegedly, her division went after conservative political groups.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So, well, this connection was kind of unveiled, if you will, by the Wall Street Journal editorial page, citing a lot of sources that there had been some kind of request from the John Doe investigators for the IRS to help them out. No evidence that actually acted upon that, but at least they created this, well, is there a connection there? GAB releases emails between Kennedy and Lerner, one of them from January 13, in which Kennedy wrote to her that things are unraveling, quote unquote, at work, and mused about possibly retiring. Now, putting that in context, back then was the first time you really kind of heard Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald talk about basically overhauling the GAB, maybe doing away with it, going back to the old model. So there's some context there. Asked the GAB spokesman for a comment, what's this email about? Said, well, it's, it was just a kind of an email among friends musing about some frustrations at work kind of thing.
Okay, so we agree that they're going to do something to overhaul GAB, but let's consider a couple options. Is it feasible to say we have X number, how many judges on GAB now? 5?
Something like 5 or 6.
Okay, is it feasible, is one option saying we will keep some judges and add 2 or 3 partisans?
They could do all kinds of things. The question though is, for Republicans, is if you overhaul the GAB, you're going to get grief about it. If you put all partisans on the board, for example, if you're a Democrat, you go, okay, look.
That goes back to the old elections board.
These guys took the watchdogs and neutered them. They tried to gut the open records law, and you can make this kind of connection, if you will, of there's something amiss in Denmark. Now, is it an effective message? We would have to see, but that's, I think, one of the dangers for Republicans of how far do you go and what can you kind of sell to the public, if you will. I've not seen many races lost because of campaign finance laws or ethics like regulations, but I do remember Steve Freeze in 06, that election, he lost in 06 or 08, and he kind of came back and said, look, this one came back to bite me. We shot down these ethics changes or taking up these packages, and it came back to bite me in my race. That's the one time I can remember it even being mentioned by a candidate as this is problematic for me.
One other model that I want to ask you about, is it possible to create like a PSC model where you have one partisan R, one partisan D, and then maybe you have an appointee of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Have you heard about that as one model?
The FEC has a model like that, right? They've got the partisan appointments, if you will. There are all kinds of things like that, but again, what grief does it get you? And I don't know, and that, I think it's the struggle, if you will, for them of they want to do something, but what can they put together that would sell and make them happy? The old partisan model, it had problems. We all saw the emails that
the old elections board.
They lobbied openly.
Power shifted to determine which party ran the Capitol. You got one set of answers if the D's were in control, and another set of answers if the R's were in control.
Oh, remember transferring money from a federal account to a state account, for example? That one switched from one election to the next.
That was the old rule until and then it's not the new rule. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, that's an issue, if you will. But again, what can they sell? I think that's the bottom line. What can they sell the public?
Okay. Attorney General Schimel hosted an open records conference. The irony here is it came about 3 weeks after the attempt by Governor Walker and legislative leaders to pretty much say what we see and how and who it comes from is secret. So he criticized that attempt, and he said open records have to change. We're going to listen to him talk about how leaders touched his term, the third rail. But then he also makes a good point, and we're going to include this in the next clip. We have no laws governing the videotapes of police body cameras. So let's listen to the Attorney General.
Let's just get right to the elephant in the room. Messing with open government laws is like touching the third rail. I think that experience has been, well, it's been learned. And I want to thank, too, the watchdogs, those especially in the media, but many in the public, too, who are watching and making sure that government does not slip the wrong direction in this. As someone, and I think it may have been Bill Leaders, I'm not positive about this, but someone said it's not only the public that is better when government is open, government is better when it's open, and I couldn't agree more.
What do you want to see done with body cameras?
Put the knife down now. Put it down. I'm serious. Put the knives down. I need you in this house right now. Put the knives. I will shoot you. Put the knife down. Put it down. Put it down. Put it down. I'm code 4. I'm code 4. Get down.
There is no guidance now relating to retention of the materials. There's no guidance as to what must be recorded, what isn't recorded. There's no guidance, as Ms. Karofsky talked about, as to whether a person could, a citizen, whether they're a victim, a witness, a bystander, whether they have any right to object to their private information now becoming public information.
We just heard, well, let me ask you this. Is our new Attorney General Brad Schimel, is he wearing a white hat on this open record stuff?
Well, what's interesting is a few weeks ago when this first came out, when the Joint Finance Committee 999 motion included this kind of gutting, if you will, of the open records law, Schimel came out against it, saying, I don't like this process. Now, what's interesting is he has said, look, there needs to be an update. He has said this for a long time. We need to account for technology and some other things. So there are opportunities, if you will, to try and revamp open records law. But he very much was against the tactics, or at least the motion that Joint Finance put in the budget a few weeks ago.
But I don't see our ledge dealing with the issue of the product of police body cameras. I don't see them getting into that this fall. Do you?
Well, it's a good question. Is even after this fallout, if you will, from the 999 motion, GOP leaders said we need to address the open records law.
Yes.
Migrant, for example, a Joint Finance co-chair, said if I have a constituent who emails me a personal issue, should his or her name become public record, you guys don't care about their privacy, but I'm trying to help somebody who's got a very sensitive, if you will, issue in his or her life. So should there be some kind of protection for that? That is an interesting question to deal with. The problem for Republicans right now is they so poisoned the well, if you will, with what happened in July. I don't know if they can touch it this fall without it becoming, well, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile kind of thing. And that's going to be the balance, if you will. They've talked about doing a study committee, Ledge Council committee this fall, coming back to look at it. But again, can you get in that, touch that rail again after what you did in July? It might be difficult to do.
Okay, new subject. Just in the last 24, 36 hours, Supreme Court Justice David Prosser issued a statement that he didn't have to issue because our court says if you get off a case, you don't have to say why and you don't have to say why you stay on a case. He offered this explanation for why he stayed on the John Doe case, which just came out. If my recusal were required now because of these expenditures, that is 4 years after lawful independent communications were made to support my candidacy, when there was no other practical way to support that candidacy and answer the virulent personal attacks, the special prosecutor will have found a way to undermine judicial elections in Wisconsin. Let's set the table. Prosser was reelected in 2011. It took a statewide recount because it would fall out from Act 10. Now, Special Prosecutor Schmitz had asked he and Gableman to recuse themselves. Now, Prosser doesn't have to issue this statement. What strikes you about Prosser's statement?
Well, what was interesting, though, with Prosser, too, is, remember, he was the only one elected under the public financing system in place.
And then it was abolished, yes.
Yes. And so he's a special case, if you will, where he was capped at, what, $100,000 in the primary and $300,000 in the general. I mean, it's very different, if you will, from the other elections, which they almost put him in a situation where he was going to be drowned out if it was a contested race no matter what. So very
Which
interesting.
amounts to him seeing a conspiracy against him leading up to the 2011 election, right?
Well,
he said, you guys changed the laws so people couldn't give me 10K like they used to be able to. In fact, they could give me a maximum of $1,000. So I had to take public financing. So in his statement, he says, I needed to benefit from the spending of these third-party groups. But
I would suggest that there are certain people who are associated with that election that still feel like Prosser got kind of caught up in a tidal wave, if you will. It wasn't about him; it was about Act 10. So I'm trying to do this delicately, but maybe Justice Prosser feels like he got the raw deal, if you will, being caught up at all this stuff 4 years ago.
Yeah,
it was very unique. What's interesting, though, and the point conservatives make is, okay, well, if he has to step off because of these, what about Shirley Abrahamson because Greater Wisconsin, for example, these liberal groups, and because some of these justices were opposed by outside groups, should they have to step off because they took the opposite end of the stick where they were opposed by an outside group who was a conservative? What about them then? And the bottom line, though, is for justices is they decided, the majority of the court did, look, only we can say if we're getting off a case. There are arguments for us to get off because of money, but we can only say when that line is crossed. End of story. Other than going to federal courts and asking the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn a case because of this, you don't have a recourse in Wisconsin. That's the bottom line.
Do you think Prosser helped himself with this statement in the eyes of public opinion?
I don't think besides you and me and like 10 people in the square, anybody's paying attention. Now, the legal community, different story. They find
everybody knows the Packer camp just opened.
Yes.
But Prosser's statement then.
Prosser's somebody who unlikely to run again. He's got 6 more years left on his term.
Yeah.
You know, it's somebody who, in a way, feels wronged by what's happened, and I think is kind of like not going to go down without a fight, if you will, or go quietly in the night.
No, that's but it was a very interesting statement for him to make. Okay, final topic, presidential politics. Why did LaDonald decide to tweet against Governor Scott Walker, saying when people find out how bad a job Scott Walker has done in Wisconsin, they won't be voting for him, massive deficit, bad jobs forecast, a mess.
A Walker fundraiser called the Donald the Dum Dum or something like that in an email over the last weekend. So the Donald decided, okay, I can take off the gloves now and go after Scott Walker. What's fascinating about the presidential race right now is there's a Donald boomlet, if you will. He's leading national polls.
Yeah.
He's doing very well in some of these states. And Republicans, some of them are just like, why? What is happening here?
Right.
But what's interesting is it seems like Donald Trump taps into a certain vein, if you will, of the Republican Party base of we don't like these things. We got issues with immigration. We don't think this is right, what's going on. And he's kind of like captured that sentiment, if you will. Now, what's also fascinating, if you're a polling junkie, is if you look at the favorable ratings of these Republican candidates, he has the worst ratings of anybody in the GOP field among Republicans.
He has the highest unfavorables. In fact, the CBS poll last night said 30% of Republicans said, absolutely, I would not vote for Donald Trump.
Which is what Quinnipiac found, too. 30%, I would never vote for this guy. I think Chris Christie was next on that list. But in a race of 16, 17 candidates plus more, out there kind
That's
of
right.
people.
A 17th hit the campaign trail today.
So you add all those in, hey, at 20%, you're sitting all right. 23%. Now what happens again? As the winning process continues, what's going to happen? Oh, by the way, what's Trump going to be like in the debates? That could be fascinating TV.
Let's get to the
watch.
debate in a minute, because let's look at how Walker answered Trump. I'm not going to go after other candidates. If you're using old data from the Democrats' talking points, that is one thing. We have turned things around, and then he went into the yada yada stump speech about how Wisconsin is so much better. So he did he try to say I'm above getting down to the mud with Donald Trump with this statement?
Well, when you get into it, if you take on Donald Trump, there's going to be some kind of, back and forth. Oh, by the way, Scott Walker has some of the best numbers of any Republican right now among GOP on the base. There's the potential, if you will, if he engages and gets into this mudslinging, that it draws his numbers down. He's in a very good position of not only is he well liked by people and in second place in most of these national polls, he is the second choice of a lot of the people who are kind of like in this middle pack, if you will.
Okay. So
once those folks fall away, Scott Walker could benefit from them and then build a number that's bigger and bigger and bigger. So the other thing is the Trump effect, will it last? We're in July, before the last day of July before in an off year.
Yeah.
3 months from now, it can be a much different story. Is there any benefit, if you will, to taking on Donald Trump and getting a tit for tat with the guy when there's no real need to right now?
Okay.
So like Walker says, I'm going to tell one of them 4, which is also kind of like front runner like lingo, if you will, of I don't need to do this right now. I'm in a good position. It's no benefit for me.
Well, I'm going to ask you how you expect Walker to differentiate himself from the other 9 candidates. But to give you time to think, let's look at who he's going to be on the stage with next Thursday, sponsored by Fox News, Cleveland, 8 p.m. Wisconsin time, 90-minute debate. Okay, so envision this. Trump, Bush, Walker, Rubio, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, and Ben Carson, and probably Christie and Perry. That's quite a squad.
Oh, yeah.
So how does Scott Walker differentiate himself?
Well, look at how he's behaved in debates before. I mean, he talks about what I'm for, not what I'm against. He really didn't engage Mary Burke that much at times. He kind of focused on what the message. He talks about a positive message, if you will, that I'm going to ignore these attacks. If you talk about my job numbers, I'm going to focus on the unemployment rate has dropped, these kinds of things, not about the fact that I missed on my pledge for 250,000 new jobs by quite a bit. So that's one thing he's going to do. The line he's been selling the trail right now is, I have fought and won. I will fight for you. Oh, by the way, I've won in this blue state. I've done this. I've done that. So I'm unique among these contenders because I've taken on these big battles and I've succeeded. That's the selling point he's going to have. Okay. Do you look for him to be low key, or do you look for him to mix it up pretty good with some of these other the Rick Perrys of the world? If history's any guide, Scott Walker's not going to be bombastic in a debate. He's not going to take the bait, if you will, and get into a, like what, 4 years ago, Mitt Romney and Rick Perry, I'll bet you $10,000 kind of thing. Yeah. You don't expect that from Scott Walker. Expect him to focus on what he's done on him. That's the message. I'm sure his campaign is telling him, just focus on you. Don't worry about them, focus on you. Is he going to debate it to win or to come in second or third? Oh, at this point, don't make any mistakes. You're not going to win a campaign in July or August of 2015. You can lose it, though, with a very bad mistake, but you're not going to win it right now. Just do what you do, come out of it, it's going okay, you'll be fine. And meanwhile, the Washington Post is reporting today that the Ricketts family, owner of the Chicago Cubs, has given him more than $5 million. So he continues to stitch together people that write 6-figure checks, hey, 7-figure checks. It's not Jeb Bush money, and we should see the rest of the our unintimidated PAC numbers today sometime. It's supposed to file by midnight. But $5 million from a family is a pretty good start. Yep. It's not Jeb Bush money again, but it shows you that if you have the big mega donors behind you, they can keep you going for a long time. Look at Newt Gingrich in 12 with Sheldon Adelson. That guy propped up his campaign for months, if you will. So that's fascinating. Well, you and I are going to watch that debate, and 1 week from today on this show, we will talk about how well Scott Walker did. I'm Steve Walders. And I'm J.R. Ross. That's a Rewind. Thank you.